what I want to try to do in my short presentation is just have a quick look at a summary of employment support across the UK, have a quick look to see what the statistics say, and also to draw some conclusions and a summary from that. Now, it's worthwhile saying at this stage that I'm a social scientist. I'm not particularly comfortable with statistics. I have colleagues in the audience that are, who I'm sure will shout at me if I get it wrong, but I'm going to try my hardest. Okay. So, Neil, wherever he's gone, when he was speaking earlier on, he was talking about the types of transition support that are available in the UK. It's quite crucial to understand that the support that's available for our service personnel is not mandated. They don't have to take it, they don't take the offer, which means that not all of them do. So whatever stats we see that come through our employment support don't reflect every single service person that, in the UK. The support that is offered tends to be focused on employment, so the employment post-transition, post-people leaving. And as Neil said earlier on as well, the types of support that are offered, the degree of support, it tends to be, well, is dictated by the length of the individual service, but also the route of the individual's discharge as well. So if somebody is discharged for a disciplinary offence, for instance, they will lose their entitlement to the type of support that they should have been getting to help them to transition out. And that's quite important to gauge as well, because there's a sort of a cohort of people that leave the military for disciplinary reasons that may not get the types of support that others do. They've been in for quite a long time, but they just don't get the types of help. Okay, so here's just an overview of the data headlines. It's sort of a mixed bag of quality, really, of the data that's out there. And the data tends to contradict itself. However, in terms of employment, veterans tend to transition pretty well in the UK. And we know that there's a number of decent data sources that we can look at. However, it's worthwhile sort of looking at Benjamin Disraeli, who's one of our prime ministers from the 19th century, and one of his quotes was, "There are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics." So sometimes it depends how you play with the figures and how you use those figures and what the politicians want to use. And this is a salient and important lesson for you. As you're at the beginning of your journey of developing your veterans administration, that you need to make sure you're collecting the right sorts of data, you analyze it in the correct way, and then your politicians are using it correctly as well. Otherwise, you can end up in a difficult situation. So there are three sort of key sources that I'm going to look at in these slides. And also, it's worthwhile saying that all the slides from today are going to be available for everybody. So you'll have all of these slides. You can pick them apart later on. So I'm going to rattle through mine in a second. You don't have to worry too much about taking notes. So, three key sources. The first is one of our big service charities called the Royal British Legion. They undertook a household survey, and from that they drew some inferences around employment support, and that was published in September 2016. There's our Ministry of Defence's annual population survey, and there's also the data that's gathered from the work that Neil and his colleagues do around the Career Transition Partnership. Just a quick headline from RBL. They're basically saying that everybody's story, their journey is different. So this makes it quite a challenge to start to compare people, because everybody's social circumstances are different, everybody's experiences in the military are different. So it's quite hard to think about one particular metric, particularly around employment. However, RBL do sort of report that most people have a successful transition, but there is an employment gap. There is a challenge with underemployment, so people with a lot of skills that leave the military and find it very hard to duplicate or to use those skills in the civilian job. And also, the challenges that we have in translating qualifications that people get in the military context into something that applies in the civilian life. So something I can think of that's quite simple is things like people that have driving licenses for driving HGVs or large vehicles. Are they the same sorts of driving licenses that you need to use commercially when you leave the military and then get a job working as a trucker or something on the streets? I'm not sure. Neil, do they translate nicely? So you have to take additional training when you become a civilian. So why don't we do that in the military? In other words, why isn't it a simple process of taking military qualifications and then using them in civilian life? As I said, I'm going to rattle through some of these. Some of these aren't that exciting. But what it does tell us really, as I said, is just about the types of employment that people get. You'll get these slides later on to read. The RBL's data is drawn from a relatively small sample size. However, people tend to look at the last lot of data that I showed you and use it as gospel. And that's dangerous because there are far better sources of data that we can go to and statistics that we can go to actually understand what's going on with our veterans population when they transition out of the military. And the annual population survey and the analysis of the Career Transition Partnership work is a far better source of data with the large population sizes. And as you can see, there are some places where the Royal British Legion data and this data differs. So, for instance, the difference between employment status for working age veterans and non-veterans, the RBL argue that veterans find it harder to get work. However, the employment statistics tend to disagree with that, the conclusion drawn by the Royal British Legion. There's a few slides here that you may be interested in when you read them on the types of employment and occupation that the veterans tend to go into in the UK. And as you can see from this, we break this down here, or the defence stats are breaking it down in terms of the types of veteran, gender, etc., and also across black and minority ethnic groups. But as you can see, male veterans here are more likely to go into manufacturing, construction, skilled trades, etc. And female veterans more likely to go to health and social care occupations and administrative and secretarial occupations. And also there's some slides here around black and minority ethnic veterans who are serving in the UK forces and the types of jobs they go into versus non-veterans, the same types of characteristics. So just very briefly to go on to the CTP slides. As Neil said earlier on in the day, he gave a very clear indication of the types of support that the CTP offer. And it's quite important to note that, that the employment rates are good for CTP. However, we only tend to monitor people up to 2 years post-service and only really interested in the 6 months after service from an employment perspective. What we don't really understand enough about, and I'll come on to this in a second, are the types of occupation. Well, we understand a bit about the types of occupation. What we don't understand is about the quality of the employment that people get. So you might be in a job, doesn't necessarily mean you're in a good job or the job that meets the skills that you have. So when we say something is successful, you've got to look under the hood, under the bonnet, of what success actually means in terms of, yes, there may be an employment, but is it something that's worthwhile? Is it something that improves somebody's well-being? Because there's no point being in a job if you're miserable, you're not earning enough money, you can't maintain your family or pay your rent. If then, government agencies or whatever are saying, yes, that's a success, tick, 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 when actually it may not be because you're not particularly happy with that type of outcome. And there's some slides here about economic inactivity that you're more than welcome to pore over. And it's just to say as well that, yes, Neil talked about CTP as being, one of the areas where support is offered for our veterans. But there are also other, both public sector and charitable sector organisations that offer support, employment support for our veterans as well. And there's quite a range of support available. And also the MOD have recently been looking at employment for spouses in the MOD, and we're due to publish a report very, very soon that's looking at the importance of providing that type of support for service families. So in terms of conclusions, the evidence suggests that most veterans in the UK have a successful transition if you base it purely around the employment domain. However, relatively little is known about the types of employment and also whether it's commensurate with the skills that these guys get when they're in the military. And also what happens over a longer period of time. As I say, it's very much based on this 2-year window after services. We don't know anything about veterans that have served that have left the services for more than 2 years. So we don't understand what the types of jobs that they're doing, what their careers are doing, whether or not they're using the types of skills that they accrued when they were in the military. I'm an academic. I would say this: further research is required to understand what's going on. We really need to do this. In the Ukraine, you're in a fantastic position at the moment. You can begin to ask some of these questions. You're setting up. You've got a new opportunity to get it right at this point, and to start doing some of this important gathering of data and some important research. Oh, and I've got to acknowledge to my colleagues who whacked all these slides together for me last week. So thank you to Lauren and to Nick. Right, okay. Shall we move on to the panelists? Mary Beth. Oh,